Hello. So in this video, we're going to talk about inductive and deductive reasoning. And these are two different ways of coming to conclusions about particular pieces of information, drawing conclusions about particular situations, but they work in opposite directions, right? So inductive reasoning essentially involves starting from specific details to draw a broad conclusion. Deductive reasoning involves starting from broad premises and applying them to draw a conclusion in a specific situation. So what does that mean? Well, we can think about it with an example, I think. So a criminal psychological profiler uses deductive reasoning. So criminal psychological profilers, essentially what they do is they say, okay, we have this type of crime, a serial arsonist, for instance. What do we know is generally true about serial arsonists? Okay, we can then apply that to this specific situation based on particular sets of evidence available to us. So that's deductive reasoning. We say, all right, we know this about the world. This is our broad premise. Now we can apply it to this particular situation. We know that serial arsonists tend to be between 19 and 30 years old, or whatever it is. I don't know. I'm not a criminal psychological profiler, but we know they tend to be this age group. We know they tend to be male. We know they tend to whatever it is. Therefore, the suspect we are looking for in this series of arson attacks is probably 19 to 30 years old, male, whatever it is. That's deductive reasoning. We take, again, broad premises, things that we know are generally true or absolutely true. That's better. And then we can apply it to particular cases. On the other hand, what in principle a detective is supposed to do is inductive reasoning. We have this piece of evidence, this piece of evidence, this piece of evidence. All of that combines to tell us this is the most likely suspect. So you're looking there at specific pieces of data, specific points, and saying, okay, here's what all of these data points mean. Here's the overall conclusion we can draw from this. So that's the broad sort of difference, is deductive reasoning starts at the top level of these are things broadly true about the world. They apply to this specific case in this way. The Aristotelian syllogism is rooted in deductive reasoning. The famous example being, all men are mortal, Socrates is a man, therefore Socrates is mortal. Broad premise, all men are mortal, specific case, Socrates is a man, conclusion, therefore Socrates is mortal. Deductive reasoning 101. Inductive reasoning, again, starts from the opposite position. We have a set of details, a set of information that all tell us something about a specific case. Therefore, we can draw a broad conclusion about what all of those details mean. So, for the theory of evolution, for instance, or the idea that the Earth is more than 6,000 years old, we look at a ton of different data points. I say we, I mean scientists, of course. Scientists look at a ton of different data points: the fossil record, geological record, carbon dating, the decay rate of radioactive materials, geology, geography, anthropology, etc., etc. All of there's massive amounts of diverse evidence that tells us roughly how old the Earth is. This is inductive reasoning because we're looking at a ton of different data points and saying, okay, when we combine all of this information, what does it tell us? So How is this important for us as writers? Well, because these are two different structures for drawing conclusions. That means these are two different ways that we can format our own arguments. You can use deductive reasoning or inductive reasoning to make an argument depending on the particular context, purpose, audience, and approach that you are taking when you're writing or when you're speaking rhetorically. There will be some situations in which inductive reasoning will be more appropriate. There will be some situations in which deductive reasoning will be more appropriate. Again, if you're doing something scientific, whether that's the hard sciences, chemistry, biology, whatever, or the soft sciences, human sciences, sociology, economics, etc., probably inductive reasoning is going to be the safer bet. You say, all right, I've looked at this concrete data. Here are the conclusions I can draw from it. That's a good structure for a scientific argument, generally speaking. On the other hand, you may, if you're doing philosophy, if you're doing ethics, if you're doing, in some cases, literature, the arts, the humanities, even things like political science, you may rely very heavily on deductive reasoning. These are broad, applicable principles. We've seen in other cases, say if you're making a political science argument, for instance, we've seen that this type of reform generates this result, therefore this bill will do X thing. That's a deductive argument because you're saying we know that when we ban books with diverse characters, it has this impact on readers, on children, whatever it is. Therefore, SB whatever this particular bill that's under debate is likely to have the same result. That's deductive reasoning, going from broad principles to specific application. So these are things that you want to be thinking about as you're figuring out how to structure your argument. What kind of evidence am I starting from? Am I starting from concrete details, or am I starting from broad principles? And how do I work with that in order to come to a valid and reliable and supported conclusion about the particular topic that I'm arguing about?